You're not going to get 10 million listeners an episode, but if you're getting relevant traffic, it will bring opportunities. And most business owners will relish in the opportunity if they got to stand up in front of a couple of hundred people and talk about what they love doing. But people think, well, 200 downloads, that's not very exciting. Still, if those 200 downloads are relevant and they are focused on your industry or your ideal customers, then it's a great thing to do, and just do it again and again.
In this episode of We Built This Business, I talk with James Mulvaney, founder of the Broadcast.co group. We discuss radio, podcasting, and the power of YouTube, and how Matchmaker.fm is connecting podcasters. If you want to learn how to leverage audio for growth, this episode is packed with expert advice. Let's head over to the podcast. James, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Dan. How's it going?
Yeah, very good today, James. Very good. Let's start off from the top, James. Can you tell us what Broadcast.co group is all about and the different companies that you have within it?
Yeah, okay. So our sort of tagline is telling the world's stories using audio, or helping people tell the world's story using audio. So most of what we do, or everything what we do really, encompasses audio in one way, shape or form, online audio. So we have a radio company. We have about 5,000 radio stations that run on a platform that we run, cloud platform. And we also have a podcasting company. So in a similar sort of way, we have a podcast hosting platform. We have a sort of social network for podcasters, and also a production company that works with sort of brands and businesses who are looking to use podcasting to kind of increase their marketing collateral and get results.
So do you have, is it two separate companies essentially under the group's umbrella?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the Radio.co and Podcasting Limited as two different businesses.
Okay. And can I ask you, what was the reason for having it into two separate companies and not just building it under one brand or one limited company, essentially?
Yeah, so Radio.co is the oldest. That's about 9-10 years old now. The company was actually incorporated in October 2014, so coming to our 10th birthday. We launched that in 2015. Obviously, it focuses on selling to the broadcasting industry. A few years later, we decided that the podcasting market was kind of growing and it was interesting, and we had more and more clients approaching us about podcasting. Obviously, a lot of radio stations will have podcasts, but not every podcaster has a radio station. So it kind of made sense to separate them. And also we were, when you're building a new software platform, you need to hire developers, and it made sense for us to sort of set up a separate payroll, because obviously the developers and the staff that we were hiring to work on the podcasting side of the business were kind of separate to what we'd already created and was already established. And of course, thinking forward, if you ever want to go and sell a company, sometimes it makes it easier if you have things segmented into, separate legal entities or separate limited companies, because you might want to sell one part of the business and not another, and it makes it a lot easier to do further down the line, if you've kind of set up a new company. And to be honest, it doesn't really, there's a little bit of admin involved. Obviously, there's another accountancy bill to pay at the end of the year and stuff, but generally speaking, it's pretty straightforward running multiple businesses under different companies. There's not a huge amount involved, and we're all still in the same office. Everyone still collaborates. Doesn't matter if they're on one payroll or the other. They still, people sometimes work cross business and all that sort of stuff. And it's about building, for me, about, in terms of kind of the staffing side of that stuff, it's about creating a team who are kind of have the same synergy and get on really well and enjoy working together.
Yeah, we have a similar kind of group structure. We had our events agency business that we initially set up, and then when we started to produce our own events in-house, we kind of set up a production side of the business, almost to kind of leverage the risk as well, because if that side went up and things went down, you had an option of pulling that side away. And now that side's kind of grown strong enough. We've now merged the two together. But that was mainly because I think that the industry that we're in, the business crossed over too much. We had both sides working together nearly all the time. Where you've got separate entities, do you find that you have staff working from one business on the other business regularly?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've sort of done a little bit of restructure over the last year. The Broadcast.co sort of holding company is relatively new. It's about a year old. And before that, I had another holding company, which was basically more attached to me as an entrepreneur. So I had some other investments tied up within that company. a couple of properties and other bits and bobs, and it kind of made sense that we separate that away. So we did what was called in legal terms as a reduction of capital demerger, which means absolutely nothing to me, which is basically where you take an existing sort of holding company, move it away, establish a new one. And, there's a fair amount of paperwork that's involved to do that and clearance with HMRC and stuff. If you're doing stuff like this and you get into a certain level of your business, it's always good to get some legal advice. You need to get accountants involved and solicitors to go through this process to make sure it doesn't come back and sting you later on. And in terms of what we've done over the past year is we've looked at our team as a whole. Yeah, we've still got 2 separate payrolls, and we've allocated resource where we think the business might need more or less attention. We've got about 40 staff on payroll at the moment, and a few contractors who work for us kind of like full time almost in sort of various other locations. Most of our team here in the UK, certainly all of our full time employees are on the payroll are based in the UK. But yeah, the contractors, we've got a couple in the USA, we've got one in Australia, we've had people in the Philippines, etc.
So, and how have you found working with the business being almost global?
Well, we have customers all over the world. About half of our audience is in the US, and we obviously have a fair chunk in Europe and the UK, and we've got pretty much everywhere in between now as well. I think because what we do is all online, we're largely kind of e-commerce driven, if you want to put it that way, or software as a service. It makes it very easy to trade, wherever you want. Really, it's just a case of getting someone's credit card details and you're away, Yeah.
So let's go back, James, to just before Radio Co was set up. So you were in school, you went to university, and then you set the business up. How did that all happen?
Going back to the beginning, I was a sort of when I was a teenager, a long time ago now. It feels like it is a fair amount of time ago, about 20 years ago. I was looking to go into radio. I wanted to be a DJ, and I love music, and I was going out DJing and stuff. And I went off to university to do a degree in what was called interactive multimedia, which sounds really old-fashioned now, doesn't it? But it's basically kind of a posh term for like web design. So I kind of learned a little bit of code. I learned a bit of design, learned a little bit about the sort of the theory behind e-commerce and all that stuff when I was doing my degree. But I was also still like really passionate about radio. And while I was at uni, I set up a streaming company for I can't really be in the industry right now, so I want to sort of like be involved somehow. So I wanted to supply services to the radio industry, and I had a company called Wave Streaming to begin with. Had some ups and downs with that, sort of grew it while I was at uni, and I was in kind of a lucky position when I graduated. I didn't need to then go and find full-time employment because I had this sort of small business I'd built, and just me on my own at that point. After I finished uni, I sort of set up shop in Manchester, which I went to uni over in Huddersfield. Moved to Manchester just because there's a little bit more exciting, a bit more going on here. Sort of got on a small office, and within a kind of year or two of moving here, I'd probably hired, I think, 2 people. I think one guy to help me out on sort of customer support, and then John, who's now my CTO, hired him as our first developer, because although I could code to a certain extent, I wasn't ever very good. I was sort of learning on the job a bit, and John came along, and he was fresh out of college at the time as well, and I was like, this guy knows way more than me, so he can build some really good products. And it was kind of handy because I'd learned enough that I could speak to developers, the language that they understand, but without being unrealistic about expectations, because I kind of knew how things were needed to be created and built. So yeah, that was how I got started in a nutshell.
What was so when you're starting a business straight from uni or while at uni, what was the one thing that was harder than you expected?
I think it was just growing, because I was trying to balance the work, everything, like lifestyle. When you're at university, I wanted to go and have a good time. Before uni, I was kind of a bit shy and a bit kind of nerdy, like hiding behind the computer. And I went to university. I was like, I want to be out there and speaking to people and socializing. So I was sort of living the student lifestyle, going out a lot and stuff and having a good time, but also running this business, but also trying to complete my degree. And I think at one stage I had a placement year where rather than working for another company, I said, right, I want to go and work for myself and just focus on growing my business. And the uni were a bit funny about that, but they found a way of making it work, which was great. And then it was like, do I really want to go back to university and do final year? And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I remember really having to dig deep to actually pull myself through the final year. And glad I did. Have I needed the good degree? Probably not. But it was a good experience. You know, I learned a lot of life lessons in the process and had a great 4 or 5 years there. And I think that was the hardest thing, was actually just balancing the workload, because it was, you know, I was still starting a business. You know what it's like. You're on your own.
Oh.
I was working quite often till 11 p.m. at night, that sort of stuff. Wearing multiple hats, you know, the support guy, the technician, the guy who's meant to be doing sales and marketing, although I wasn't very good at it back then, and trying to learn all this stuff whilst trying to complete the degree. I think that's, you know, it's a good time to do it, because if you fail, you've got nothing to lose, you know. That's kind of how I looked at it at the time. When I speak to, you know, I like to sometimes go and help out, and I've, you know, been guest lecturer at different universities and stuff. And I always say, if you're thinking about doing it, now is a good time, just because if you fuck everything up, doesn't matter, you know.
Yeah, and I think when I was at university, I must have come up with about maybe 50 different ideas that I was going to do.
Oh yeah, I was the same. Yeah,
constantly coming up with when I come out of uni. And one of my biggest regrets is probably not doing it.
Yeah,
because you know, when you just go for something and you just give it a go, you just don't know what's going to happen, do you? You know, you literally just don't.
I was in like a shared workspace. You know, they call them, well, it's like a WeWork basically, but back then it was, I don't know what it was called, a business incubator, I think. And I had an office with like 4 or 5 other guys who were a little bit older than me. They were sort of like in their late 20s, and I was like 18, 19. And you know, they'd been out, graduated, gone and got a job for a few years, and then thought, fuck this, I'm going to go and work for myself. So it was interesting to sort of hear from their experiences. And like, we used to just bounce ideas around constantly, and it was pretty mad. And we'd end up, you know, we all sort of started running these little side hustles together and stuff. It was kind of fun. Had a lot of weird stories and things come out of it. But you know, it was all good experience.
Do you speak to any of those guys now?
Yeah, still to Steve and Phil. Still really good friends with them. We've all gone off and gone our separate ways in terms of we're not really in business together as such. I mean, me and Steve have done a few bits and bobs together over the years, but basically we're all running very different businesses, and you know, have kind of reached different levels of scale and all that sort of stuff. But still very good friends. You know, it's one of these things, isn't it? You kind of move away and go your separate ways, and you try and kind of, to begin with, you're meeting up like a few times a year, and then it gets to like once a year if you're lucky. You know, that's kind of where we're at now. But I'd like to see them more. But it's just one of these things. We've all grown up and got our own lives and stuff now. But still good friends.
Life gets in the way, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
So tell us about Radio Co. So what year did you launch that?
2000. Well, we went live 2015. We've been developing it for about a year before that.
So if you could just give us, because I've never heard of Radio Co per se, so could you just give us what exactly is Radio Co and what does it do for customers?
Yeah, so if you think about what conventionally someone's idea of a radio station might be, it would be like a building with lots of fancy equipment in, and studios, and computers and boxes of equipment buzzing away, and obviously a big antenna up on a hill somewhere. We basically do all of that, but within the cloud. So people can upload content, they can create playlists, they can then schedule those playlists to fire out at certain times of the day. They can broadcast live from anywhere to anywhere using very, you know, relatively little equipment. So you can do it from a laptop or a phone or a desktop. And we handle the streaming, so people can tune in using any device. So mobile, might be a smart speaker these days, you know, obviously listening via desktop, on television, you know, Apple TV, all that sort of stuff. And basically then sometimes people will take that feed and relay it via a transmitter to over the air. But for most cases it's a digital format, you know, it's online, it's via the sort of devices I've just mentioned. But we handle all that process as kind of radio station in a box, if you like.
I visited a radio station I think it was about a year ago, and yeah, like you said, it was a massive setup, lots going on, but unfortunately they've recently just pulled the plug essentially. Because I think because of the costs are just too high.
It's too expensive, yeah. So, yeah, that's what we wanted to do, is disrupt the industry in a sense that we're creating a way of launching a radio station without that huge initial capex that's required quite often, or as perceived as being required, not necessarily actually is. You know, and allow creators, you know, so our clients aren't just radio stations. It could be like DJs, musicians, We've got music festivals. We've got like brands who use us to do sort of all kinds of crazy audio experiences. So Vodafone, for example, have something called Snowdophone, which is a Christmas radio station they've run. We've had Whiskers Pet Food use us to create a radio station that calms your cat down before. So it's or you call it a radio station or a stream or whatever you want. It's all audio, right? It's all stuff that you can consume online by listening.
So how many radio stations do you currently have running, do you know?
There's about 5,000, just shy of 5,000, something around that mark.
Wow, that is impressive. And that's obviously worldwide.
Yeah, all over the world. As I say, I think I mentioned earlier about half our audiences or half our customers are in the USA. But we've got radio stations running pretty much everywhere you can imagine.
Wow.
And of course, listeners, we get millions and millions of listeners come through our sort of infrastructure, our network. They're not obviously our listeners, they're our clients' listeners, but, people consuming radio from lots of emerging markets now, as kind of smartphones are becoming more widely available. And obviously, the internet is becoming more widely available in sort of developing countries and things. Using online streaming radio is a great way of reaching the sort of far corners of the earth.
If we talk about radio, we'll come on to podcasting in a minute, but is radio increasing in popularity, would you say, or is it just changing the way that people are listening to it through smartphones and other devices?
Yeah, I think there's been a shift over the last couple of years, certainly. And if you look at, here in the UK, we've got a system called Radar, which measures listener habits, and they've said that sort of digital is slowly overtaking kind of what you call a terrestrial radio station, so FM and the old twisty dial stuff, is now less popular than digital. In terms of listening habits, was really interesting because during COVID we saw, so throughout 2020, most of 21, it was just we had to actually provision more infrastructure, like extra servers, because we were getting so much listeners coming through our platform. And that's because people value radio as a sort of companion, I think. And it's amazing because even in 2020, there's all sorts of other sources of entertainment out there. When you're stuck in your house or your flat for lockdown, you can go and listen to Spotify, you can listen to podcasts, you can go and watch TV, Netflix, so on and so forth. But radio, certainly, we saw it. It was basically like double the traffic overnight when it kind of got to March 2020. We had to provision all these extra servers to kind of just keep up with the demand, and it was caught us off guard. And I think it's an interesting lesson because although people think of radio perhaps as like an old-fashioned format now, it's still really prominent and people still value it, because I think what it does is it just gives you that human connection, which an algorithm generated playlist just doesn't have, and the fact it's live and it's talking about what's happening right now is kind of different to a podcast. So there's I think for me, I like listening to podcasts, I like listening to radio, and I also like just listening to music on Spotify, but it just depends on what I'm doing or the mood I'm in, and I think there's value to all three.
No, definitely. The podcast industry has grown quite a lot over the last, more than a few years now.
Yeah.
When did you notice that podcasting was starting to grow and you decided to obviously go into that medium?
Yeah, if it was up to me, if I look, shoulda, woulda, coulda and all that, isn't it? But we kind of got into it in 2018, 19. I think it was 17, 18 when it was really starting to turn. I kind of wish we'd been about a year ahead of where we actually were when we launched Podcast.co and then Matchmaker and then Q later on. But, it's interesting is we saw a huge growth in the number of podcasts. I think there's something like 2 million podcasts now, which are, are listed on Spotify and Apple, etc. But there's still, although there was this big explosion, a lot of people haven't maintained, creating content. So there's a lot of podcasts that are now inactive. Sometimes there's only 1 or 2 episodes. And so 2 million might sound like, if someone's thinking about launching a podcast, well, it's very saturated, there's too much competition. But actually, I don't remember the exact number, but it's only a few 100,000 podcasts that what you consider active, like there's been content posted within, say, the past 60 days.
Yeah. I think it's called pod fade, isn't it? Where people realise how much work it takes to create a podcast and continue with that. With obviously your podcast.co agency and Q, So you launched that in, you said 2018, and you wished you were a year earlier. Why did you wish you were a year earlier?
Well, it's just that, at the time there was a lot of competition springing up. and we were a little too late to market, in my opinion. I think if we'd have got in a year before, because of course it's one of these businesses, when you get customers, they tend to stay with you a long time. So it was a bit of a land grab, to try and get podcasts which were springing up left, right and centre to sort of sign up to you versus one of the many other options. And I say that's probably why I wished we'd launched. We were at, as I said, I think it was probably 2017, 2018 when I was like, well, maybe we should do this. And do we want to just build it onto the radio platform, or do we want to do it as a separate thing? And we made the decision it makes it sense to do a separate thing because, effectively we've got two assets as a business then, two platforms. There's caveats to that because it's more to maintain, it's more expensive to build it as a separate thing, etc. And obviously you've got to do your own marketing and everything if you're spinning up a new brand. But yeah, I just partly underestimated perhaps how long it was going to take to actually build, because I was thinking let's get it live in 3 or 4 months, and it took, I think, basically the best part of a year before we had something that was really ready for market and built to a sort of like enterprise level. Because the reiterations of radio.co and what was before radio.co, which I kind of briefly mentioned earlier, we've had peaks and troughs where suddenly we launch a product. In the early days, 10 years or 12 years ago, when I was sort of fresh out of university, we'd literally launch products and someone would be very successful and they'd end up falling over because we didn't really know what we were doing as a team, and they weren't really built to sort of withstand huge amounts of traffic. And so they get to a point where things would start breaking, or there'd be so much demand it would fall over, and we've had to quickly learn how to make things more scalable as a software company. And obviously we wanted to get that right with podcasting, because that's the worst thing that can happen. Even when we launched radio.co, we had a few issues, technical problems which caused problems early on because it grew really quickly. And again, you've got to make sure that you're planning for this. I mean, there's different ways of building products. You can sort of sling them together, or you can do them properly, and we very much do things properly now, because we've kind of been through that thing where we've done it in the past. We've just sort of slung something together, and if it becomes popular, then you're screwed. But then, of course, it takes longer to build things properly. So that's kind of the caveat.
It's hard, isn't it? Because a lot of gurus out there say sell before you build, isn't it? Essentially. So, once you've established that there is a demand in that market, then it's time to invest the money into it. But at the same time, if you've got the customer and you can't deliver the product, it's hard. It's a hard balance, and that's what business is all about.
With Matchmaker, we were really good in that we built Matchmaker initially as like a really basic MVP, and all that was just 2 Google forms. One was saying, do you want really good quality guests for your podcast? And one was saying, if you want to be a guest on podcast, fill this form out. And we just sort of started sending some traffic to these 2 forms, and we put them on the podcast.co site, and we realized that there was sufficient traction there. I think we had a couple of 100 responses, and it wasn't just like give us your name and email. It was tell us what sort of guests you're looking for, or the sort of content that's on your show, and all this sort of stuff. So people were actually filling out almost like profiles, really, and that's why we were like, right, okay, well, maybe we should actually make something to make this happen.
Matchmaker.fm. So for the listeners that don't know that software as a service, could you tell us more about that? Because I've used it recently, James. It's fantastic. We've really, really benefited from it. But if you
it's how you and I met, wasn't it? It's how we connected for this.
It is.
Yeah. So for anyone who's listening, so there's sort of like layman's way of describing it. It's like a social network for podcasters and what I would say is like industry experts. Okay, so if you've got a podcast, perhaps you want to create a podcast about marketing, and you're planning out your first season. You say, right, well, we want to have 6 different episodes covering different aspects of marketing, right? So it might be like we want an episode where we're talking about SEO, one where we're talking about Facebook ads, one where we're talking about video marketing, so on and so forth. And then you want to create really good content around each of these different topics. Well, you can either talk about it yourself. Most people are kind of have got whatever topic they're interested in. They might have a really specific knowledge, but most people have kind of got a general overview of marketing as a whole. But what's really good is if you can put in guests on your podcast to talk about these areas in real fine detail, so you can interview them and get some really good nuggets and advice. So to do that, you can go to Matchmaker. You can say, right, I want to find someone who's got expertise in search engine optimization or Facebook ads or whatever it might be, and find anyone who's kind of got those categories or those things mentioned on their profile. You can then reach out to them and say, hey, I'm planning a podcast all about marketing. Would you be interested in being interviewed? And they'll hopefully get back to you and say, yes, I'd love to be. So that's really what it's intended to do. It's intended to be a tool for people who are looking for experts, or if you've got a level of expertise about a specific topic or subject and you want to share your stories and your knowledge on that and kind of use it as a tool to grow your personal brand, you can register as a guest. You can say, yeah, I'm an expert on Facebook marketing or whatever it might be. Here's some examples of content that I've written or podcasts that I've appeared on or videos that I've made, and here's why you might find me as an interesting guest for your show. Get in touch. So there's kind of two different modes of operation. There's two different profile types that you can create on there.
Yeah, I mean, I first used it, I think it's probably about 6 months ago, but I was looking for an expert in PPC marketing.
There we go.
And
so
I was messaging people on LinkedIn, but they weren't, when they were responding, they hadn't done a podcast before. They weren't
really
seasoned, right. And you almost want to speak to someone who not only knows what they're talking about, but is also good at talking about it.
Well, or just has the want to actually do it, because this is the thing, anyone can, we obviously try and encourage people. A lot of people who want to get into being on podcasts, perhaps they've got, they're a bit first time, is a bit nervous, or they're not really sure what to say, or, so Matchmaker's a good way of kind of, getting experience or making those connections. Don't have to necessarily be on Joe Rogan on day one, right? But it is good practice, and of course, if all you have to do is show up and talk about something that you're passionate or interested about, and it's really not that difficult. It's just like having a conversation in real life. But most of the time these days, you're on a tool like Riverside, like we are today, you're talking remotely. But yeah, I mean, you're right. A lot of people still are sort of scared of going into it, or just haven't done it before, and they think, well, it's not. They don't see it as an opportunity. But of course, if you're a PPC expert, say in Daniel's example, and you've got you want to promote your business, the best way of promoting your business is to go out there and talk about your client case studies and give your advice for free to a certain about a degree, and just sort of proof is in the pudding, isn't it? If you're talking about PPC confidently on a podcast and you get a chance to plug your consultancy at the end, people can come to you and sign up or inquire about using your services.
Yeah. Are you seeing kind of like an increase in the number of business owners that are looking to either go on podcasts or have their own podcast, for example?
I think so. I think it's kind of, there's still lots and lots of people or industries which are not that competitive in terms of if you get a podcast. Like I've got a guy on LinkedIn, and I don't think, well, there's two people on LinkedIn that keep popping up for me. These are really niche podcasts, right? But there's clearly demand for them because it's like there's all these other people in the industry. One's about flooring, right? Doesn't sound very, but yeah, I can't remember the chap's name. It's a UK flooring podcast, and of course, if you think about how many flooring contractors are up and down the country, or
it's massive.
It's a big industry. Yeah. Everyone needs floors for their houses, their businesses, pubs, etc. And the other one is self storage. So yeah, again,
I think I've come across that. So the self-storage, is it Dean Booty?
It is, yes, that's his guy's name, yeah. But, this is the thing. If you're in an industry where you think, well, no one's interested in what I've got to do because I'm in, widget manufacturing or whatever, I think these guys are proving it wrong, which I think is brilliant. It's just like, the more specific you can be, you're not going to get 10 million listeners an episode. But, if you're getting relevant traffic, it will bring opportunities. And, and most business owners will relish in the opportunity if they got to stand up in front of a couple of hundred people and talk about what they love doing, in the town hall sort of environment. But, or going to a seminar or whatever. But people think, well, 200 downloads, that's not very exciting, but it's still, if those 200 downloads are relevant and they are, focused on your industry or your ideal customers, then it's a great thing to do, and just do it again and again. Do it as much as you can.
The thing I find with podcasts as well is podcasts, people will tend to listen for longer. So, where YouTube or of course TikTok, is very flighty. It's literally like you've got sometimes three seconds to kind of make an impression before someone moves on, and that counts as a view. Whereas with a podcast, if you get 200 downloads, like you say, and it's 200 people and 80% of them are staying to the end, that's a really engaged audience.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's 70% of listeners actually complete the episode. And of course, your episode can be 20 minutes, 30, 40 minutes. there's some that to go on for 2 hours. I mean, I think 30 to 40 minutes is probably the sweet spot for most people. You know, that's a workout in the gym or a commute to the office or whatever for a lot of people. So that's kind of the good time. And you know, if you're getting people listening to you, and there's just so much opportunity to kind of, you don't have to lead with a pitch. And I think podcasts shouldn't be sort of super salesy, but just try and weave it in, you know, get it into the conversation naturally. That's the way to do it.
This podcast is sponsored by Team Building Experiences. If you're planning a team building event, away day, or corporate event, then check out team-building-experiences.co.uk and state podcast 15 in the comments to receive 15% off your proposal. Podcasting has kind of hit the limelight with, you know, video now is becoming the big format for podcasts, especially with YouTube adopting it and having, you know, their own podcast section now. In your opinion, how is the market changing as a result of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a funny one, because I always think, what's the difference between a YouTube video and a podcast? I can't really figure it out. They're sort of similar a lot of the time, aren't they? I guess a podcast is just a sequence of videos or content that's all sort of joined together normally. YouTube is actually the biggest platform now for podcast consumption. I think, you know, the benefit of podcasting 5 years ago, 10 years ago was, oh, well, you don't need to do video, right? You can just have audio. And we always recommend to clients, every client pretty much we work with at Q, we do video. I think all of them. I don't think there's any that's just audio only right now. And even if it's just like this, recording, you know, via sort of webcam. Because I think not just actually the ability to sort of sit and watch stuff. And I still think when people consume video podcasts on YouTube, a lot of the time it is still in the background, right? So they might not be watching a video, it's just playing on a browser tab somewhere. But you can just repurpose the content, you know, it's creating the little nuggets of advice that you might be giving yourself or you might be getting from guests, cut them out. You know, there's tools there's AI, which is fantastic now. It can do all this for you with just a click of a mouse, and sometimes you need to edit it in a bit and stuff, but it's pretty good mostly. And then you can repurpose those assets for things like LinkedIn, Twitter, or so on and so forth. You know, just to kind of either just build your personal brand, use them as little like talking points to get discussion around your sort of product or service or your sort of industry, you know, or just grow the podcast and get more listeners to actually, you know, listen to the full episode. But I think that's the argument for video versus using not just audio only.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
James, do you have your own podcast?
No, not currently. I have in the past. Interestingly, the first ever podcast I did was about 15 years ago. And that was with one of the chaps that I mentioned earlier who I used to share an office with. So we were really early adopters in 2008 or 9 it was. And yeah, we just around the time lockdown happened, I had a podcast called Create, Reach, Inspire. But actually, I'm just so busy at the moment helping other people with podcasts and working with clients and stuff. That's really what I've been doing for the past few years. We have got a couple of podcasts in-house, which I'm sometimes appear on, but they're not my podcasts as such.
So, I'm just thinking how big that podcast would have been, the one that you started in 2008, if you were still doing it now.
I agree. I've always thought about this. You know, we gave it, I don't know, again, it was just a classic thing of, how old was I then? 20, 21. And I was like, well, this is a good idea, but it was so niche, you know, to get a podcast then was, you had to download it to your computer and then copy it to your iPod. The iPhones were just sort of around, but you know, it wasn't like now where you're on the train or whatever and you like just search on Spotify and just hit play. It didn't work like that. Back then it was more of something you'd need to make a conscious, but I seem to remember like we didn't really have a plan either. It was just me and Steve, my friend. We were just talking about what we were doing day to day, and it was kind of like loosely, what was it called? It was something about marketing. That was the topic.
Is it still on now? Is it on Spotify now?
I've tried to find episodes because I want to listen to them again, and they're long gone. They're just some old hard drive somewhere. But no, it probably existed for about 2 years, and then it just vanished off the face of the internet, and you can't go back and get it. It's not like it nowadays when you upload stuff to YouTube and it's there forever, isn't it? It was different back then. But yeah, you're right. It'd be interesting. What if we kept at it for another few? I think maybe we were a little bit too early, but if we started it 5 years later and kept at it, it could be massive. We could be Joe Rogan's. Who knows?
We'll never know.
Yeah.
So, not having a podcast, but I know you have a YouTube channel, James. So, Can you tell me obviously, because you run, radio.co, podcast.co, but you have a YouTube channel. Can you tell us what was the strategy behind going onto YouTube in the beginning, and what has the outcome been from having a YouTube channel?
Sure. I've always been, going back to the when I was just talking about, I was a really early adopter of YouTube, and I realised that, in the early days, if we post, and everyone does this now, but if we post good content on YouTube with a clear call to action at the end, like go and download this PDF or sign up to our mailing list or whatever it might be, you get traffic and you get customers through it, basically, because it's a good way of finding traffic for your niche, for your business. And obviously in radio, it's quite a niche thing. It's not something for everyone, but if we're putting good quality content about radio, people lap it up and they'll sign up with us ultimately. So we've always been doing that. Radio.co YouTube channel is now, I think, at 50,000 subscribers, which is insane, really good. And we continue to push out lots of content about radio. And I had a YouTube channel which was under my own name, which was about 10 years old. And about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, we decided to reinvigorate it because it hadn't been busy for a number of years. And it was just kind of the content I was producing in the early days was pretty rubbish. This was before we had like a production team in house. We didn't have like good quality equipment and stuff, so it was a lot of just stuff that was like a really old camera on a tripod and me just sort of talking to camera and stuff. So we thought, there's already there was kind of maybe I think 3,000 subscribers on it or something. It was quite small but not tiny. We thought, well, let's just create some more content, and it's sort of similar stuff to what we were doing. So I started posting more content around audio. Some of it was like reviewing microphones or pieces of audio equipment, stuff like the Rodecaster. And others bits of were sort of more advice content. So it might be like how to write a script for your podcast, or here's how you can go find guests, and all that sort of stuff. Gave it a good 2 or 3 years, and actually we hired a producer just to focus on that, because I was very obviously, being sort of CEO of a number of different brands, you've got to still have enough time to actually do stuff, not just creating content. Although creating content's fun, does occupy time, even just appearing it, so we hired Graham to sort of edit it and shoot it and help me with it, and it just got to a point where like I did it for every single week we were doing a different video. Felt like we had done as much as we possibly could, and it kind of gets to the point where you start having to repeat yourself, or you just think you're looking at the previous year's videos and you're thinking, right, okay, what performed really well last year? And it's like just the sort of same old suspects come up, and you think, right, well, just do another video about that, but just do it slightly different, which is fine. It's just rinse and repeat. But yeah, it was just the sort of grind of doing it every YouTube video, long form YouTube video every single week. And they ran for, on average, 10 to 20 minutes, I would say. Just became like, it kind of got boring. I sort of lost the excitement. So I just decided to give it a break. And I put a video up saying, I quit YouTube, like in this style that a lot of YouTubers do, make it all dramatic. And a lot of people watched it, and I said, and I was like, right, well, I'm not really quitting, but I'm just going to take a break, and then I'll do a video once every now and again, but I'm not going to commit to doing weekly videos anymore. And actually, then 2 years, well, a year and a half went past, and we hadn't touched it because I had just been busy. And I sort of thought, well, maybe we should try and do something. So, it wasn't actually my idea, but it was our sort of content team. They were saying, well, why don't we create a new brand called Audio Insider, which is kind of a bit like what you were doing. It's more focused on audio as a whole, not specifically just focusing on either on radio or podcasting or audio books, but it could be about anything to do with audio online, because it's reached that point where it's enough of a mainstream thing now where everyone uses it and knows about it. And I said, yeah, okay, so why don't we just, initially they sort of start building it as a new YouTube channel. I was like, well, why are we doing this? We've got a channel with 20,000 subscribers, and it's, the interesting thing about the content I created, even though I haven't touched it for sort of 18 months, can still continue to grow, and the videos can still continue to gain traction. And that's the good thing about content creation. It's evergreen. If you have a break or if you sort of give it a pause for a while, it doesn't really matter. So we've then sort of shut down this new channel that they'd created and rebranded mine, and we sort of relaunched it a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, it's content for anyone interested in using audio to sort of grow, promote their business, or they're just interested in the audio as a medium, the storytelling mechanism.
It sounds great. I mean, I can only imagine that, like you said, that once you get to 3 years of producing content and you've lost that enthusiasm, you're going, you need a break sometimes, and it needs a rebrand, isn't it? But what I wanted to focus on was the ROI that you get from that sort of content. You've already talked about the evergreen, and the fact that it's still producing increased subscriptions or subscribers. Sorry, but when you stopped doing that YouTube channel, did you notice any, say, reduction in leads, or what was the impact ROI wise?
Well, the way I track it ROI, and the way I think is really good to track ROI, is have really specific calls to action. You can't do this necessarily in every single video, but let's say there's a video which is, I know it performed well because we still get leads from it. It was like how to write a script for your radio show. Okay, so we know that someone coming in to watch that is really specific, and it could be a really good customer for us because we know that they've got a specific interest in radio. They're looking to write scripts. They're in the production world. They're not someone who's just interested in listening to radio, right? So at the end of the video, we talk about some tips of, kind of long form content. Here's 10 tips of how you can write engaging scripts for radio. This could be for podcasting. It could be for whatever you're doing. And at the end of the video, we say, well, we've already written we've written a sort of like a PDF help guide, some templates of scripts that you can use, which we know are really effective. Download it for free, put your name and email address on this specific landing page. We'll give that URL out in the video, we'll put it in the comments below. And that is a really good way of then measuring or getting people into your funnel. And obviously then you can measure and track them through the funnel and see, obviously some people then turn into customers, others don't, but you've got them as a lead. And they'll then receive your emails, so it's that to me is what's really good about YouTube. And you can do this in a podcast as well, but rather than just sort of being vague and saying, go and sign up to our website, blah, blah, blah.com, say, well, go to blah, blah, blah.com/whatever, some kind of benefit or action that you want them to take. And you can say, well, everyone who's subscribed via that page has come in through that specific video. And if it's had 20,000 views, you can say, oh, well, okay, for every 10 views we get one subscriber or whatever. And it makes it much easier for us as sort of marketers to measure a return on investment. And also, as I say, it's evergreen, once it's up there. And this is what I found interesting with the sort of James Mulvaney channel, even though I hadn't touched it for 18 months. We log on to ConvertKit, which is a mailing list tool, where we were putting these leads. No, I logged into it like the other day when we were sort of rebranding everything, and I'm like, well, we might as well just use this mailing list and rebrand that as well. And it, there was I think it was 40 subscribers had come in over the past 7 days. So even though we hadn't touched it, it's still active. It's still, it's all automated, isn't it? So people subscribe, they get a sequence of emails, etc. And you can use those, nurture those leads, turn them into customers.
And I guess it's almost, you can call it leverage, essentially, isn't it? You're leveraging the work that you've previously done to be able to build the next brand or the next version of what you're creating. So when we look at the where we are now, James, what are you looking to build up at the moment? So you've got Audio Insider, you've also got Matchmaker.fm. You sound incredibly busy. You've also got Radio Co, Podcast Co. What is a normal day like for you at the moment? What are you focusing on?
Well, I mean, we kind of, it's a case of we're looking at the opportunities at the moment. So parts of the business are growing better than others. And there's parts of the business, I won't go into too much on here because I don't want to sort of share everything. But there's certain parts of the business where at the moment we're thinking, well, do we really want to continue doing that or not? And if we do continue doing it, how much resource do we need to dedicate it? So a lot of the time it's sort of being strategic. I think my job as founder really is to kind of keep the ship sailing forward. And largely as a don't mind admitting this, I think a lot of businesses are in the same place. This year has been tough compared to the previous few years for us. So we're sort of looking at different opportunities and trying to identify, how we can kind of get back onto, into a nice place where we're kind of growing and innovating. But yeah, I think the market as a whole has slowed down. Obviously, a lot of businesses are in this position. I think some are a lot worse off than us. But equally, sometimes when there's times of economic downturn, there's also opportunities. So we're sort of trying to seek out what they look like for us in our business and try and figure out how we can make next year better than this year's been. So
earlier on in the podcast, we talked about your team that you started building. I just wanted to kind of focus on the team that you've got now. And do you have a senior management team beneath you? How is it all structured?
Yeah, I do. So I've got there's three people on the management team. So I've got COO, Chief Operations Officer, CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, and CTO, so Chief Technology Officer. And then obviously myself as CEO that sits sort of above them almost. So the four of us will meet every single month, have management meetings, look at our management accounts. And below that, I don't really like using the word below. I always try and think of our business as a fairly flat structure, but we've kind of got more of a hierarchy than we used to. We've had to since we, as we've grown a number of teams. So, sort of underneath sort of management teams sits the sort of head of departments. So we've got, for example, we've got head of content, head of marketing, head of solutions, etc. And these people kind of manage manage their own sort of teams within the business. So that's how things are set up for us at the moment.
Yeah, because once I imagine for listeners out there that have a business that are getting towards that scaling stage, I think that's one of the hardest parts is building that team and how it looks. Like you say, if you want a more horizontal look, as opposed to a vertical look, then you don't have so many layers of management.
It worked for us really well having this sort of very much like sort of level flat structure, probably for, I don't know, when did we probably for like sort of 10 years. And then like 5 years ago when we got beyond, I suppose probably beyond sort of 25, 30, that was when we really had to start thinking a bit more about having a management team in place. And, the last year we've kind of introduced the heads of departments and we have an HOD sync meeting once a month, with the head of departments. And that's kind of the important thing, because that's like looking at the little details of the business that sometimes can get overlooked. And get your updates on how things are progressing and, spot the opportunities and weaknesses and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think for me, having the sort of C-suite, or whatever you want to call them, I suppose they've been in place maybe for 8 years or so now. And I think that's been really valuable for me as an entrepreneur, because it's just, I've become less involved with the day-to-day of the business and like more focused on, strategy and growth opportunities and stuff. And even going back to when I first started hiring, I very much sat down and looked at like, right, well, what's occupied? The first hire I made was someone to do customer support, because that was one of those things that was occupying, technical support. What we do is it has a bit of a technical nature. It does occupy a lot of time. It's a complete requirement for customers. They need it. But I was just really bad at doing customer service, and still am. You shouldn't trust me speaking to customers at all, to be honest.
Well, they say that's what you should do, though, isn't it? You should bring people in where you're weakest, and you focus on where you're strongest.
Absolutely, and like I just was losing my temper, and I was being just too, I just wasn't giving enough attention to detail, and I wasn't being patient enough. Back then, anyway, and so I was like, right, but I'm not good at doing this, because if people were like, why isn't this working, or why doesn't it work? I'm like, well, it's obvious because you haven't done that. But of course, it's not obvious to customers. But this is why I should be trusted in that position. But yeah, it was like, that was the first thing, and it was really the first hire I made of saying I got the hire right. Actually, wasn't the right person, but it was the right position. But I immediately noticed, a lot of people are going through that phase, and I hear this when I speak to entrepreneurs who are kind of going from that, who do I hire first? They're petrified of doing it. And I remember being scared as well, putting it off probably for a couple of years, but then as soon as I made the hire, I should have done that 2 years before, rather than sort of struggling and doing it all myself still.
I think the fear is that you've actually got another human being that is not relying on you, but they're, you're paying them, isn't it? And that's often what I hear was when I speak to people that are looking to make that first hire.
Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility, especially, when you start getting above, well, I'd say probably when you get beyond like 5, you're like, wow, they're dependent on me for their livelihoods effectively. And, it's a responsibility you just have to take and run with it. But yeah, it's, when you start sort of like, people start, because again, when I started hiring, I was very young still. And a lot of the people were sort of similar age to me. But then when you start hiring people a little bit older who've got more responsibilities, they might have a family and mortgages and stuff, then it's like, well, this is a lot of responsibility, and ultimately it's all down to me. But yeah, it's just part of one of the things of running a business. But I think for me, team is so important, and it's great having a really, really good team around you. It's, I think as an entrepreneur, it's one of the best things that you can do in business.
Definitely. Yeah, couldn't agree more. I have 3 final quick-fire questions for you, James, if that's all right.
All right.
So, first one is, what's the best business advice you've ever received?
Persistence is key. Is one of my sort of go-to phrases, and I believe in it. When I look back at myself when I was very young, I was kind of going off on a lot of tangents, but actually sometimes you've got to stick at one thing, make sure you just do it really to the best of your ability, and once you kind of get a niggle that actually maybe it's working, bloody stick at it. Don't try and kind of go off and look at the next shiny new thing, because I was guilty of that in the early days. And then when I realised actually I need to, because the radio thing was kind of core, it was starting to do well. As soon as I realised that and stuck with it, that's when things started really taking off.
It's good advice. Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that as well in the past.
Yeah,
it's an easy thing to follow those shiny objects.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Registering domain names for all sorts of stuff. That's what I was guilty of. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got about 55 domain names, I think.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone trying to start a business in 2024?
Well, I think just do it. Just go for it. Like this. I don't know if now is. I sort of look back at. I've thought to myself, would it be easy? Would I kind of do what I did 10 years ago, 15 years ago now? And I don't know. I think definitely things have changed a lot since then. But then also there's lots of tools that make things a lot easier than things were back then. So I don't know. You've just got to go for it. You've got to just take the plunge. And also, don't be scared of failing. If it messes up, you can always go back to your job, or as I mentioned earlier, if you're at university or something, you've really got nothing to be afraid of at all.
Yeah, 100% agree on that. Final question: what podcasts or books have you read recently, or would recommend to someone?
What podcasts have I listened to most recently? There's one I've listened to quite a lot over the last couple of months. It's a guy called James Sinclair, who's an entrepreneur who runs a really interesting business. There's a lot of kind of family entertainment type things, which is completely different to what I do. But he has a podcast where he interviews entrepreneurs it's sort of kind of like an agony aunt for entrepreneurs, like that sort of vibe. And it's really good. I think it's just called the James Sinclair podcast.
Yep. No, I've met James as well. He's a good guy.
Have you? There we go.
He's very, very good at content as well. He's got a YouTube channel. He's got podcasts. He's got an ice cream company. He's got a hotel. He's got play centres. He's
all sorts of farms with animals, and this is what I liked about his YouTube stuff is that for me my business has always been very office based. We're an internet company. All of our different animal parks and amusement centres, these are all websites. These are digital assets online. I really liked it because it's nice to actually go and see someone who's got all these things, and it was spread out and going from location to location. It was really interesting, and actually a little bit of me is kind of envious because I think, what happens if I had a business like that? Because I'm in a completely different world. As I say, I have these different things, but it's just they're all digital assets versus like real world stuff. So I think, and I think I sometimes question if I'm too far down the line now to start going off on tangents like that. But I always think, God, that looks fun. Like, it really does look like a fun business to run. Stressful maybe at times, but a lot of fun.
Definitely. So, James, where can listeners who have listened to the podcast today find out more about yourself and also your businesses?
Yeah, I have a very lame website, which is jamesm.com. There's links to all my social on there. I'd say LinkedIn is probably the best channel to connect with me on at the moment. That's where I'm most active. And of course, check out our websites, radio.co, podcast.co, matchmaker.fm, and qpodcast.com. If you could be bothered to remember any of them.
We'll put those in the show notes as well.
Thanks.
Lovely. So thanks so much, James, for coming on the podcast today. If you've enjoyed the podcast, if you could do one thing for me and follow or subscribe to the channel on your podcast listening app, it enables us to grow the show.